Have you ever sseen this image? These are the climate stripes, which show the increases in average global temperatures for the last few decades. And as you can see, it's been getting hotter and hotter and hotter. We're going to speak to the scientist who came up with those stripes, which I have emblazoned on a mug in my kitchen, and he will put the current hot weather we're experiencing in the context of what is happening with the climate for the planet overall. That is coming your way on this episode of Newscast. Well, here in the studio is BBC climate editor Justin Rowlatt. Hello, Justin.
Hi there.
You're in your shorts.
Because I've been rushing around the country trying to report this hot weather.
But this is my dilemma, because I still feel I can't wear shorts in the office because I'm a journalist in the BBC. But actually, maybe that's something that's a norm that needs to change for a warming world.
That norm, but I must say, I did feel self-conscious as I flapped in my Birkenstock shoes and scruffy shoes.
You look great, though, don't you? Also, down the line, and I can't see him, so I actually don't know what he's wearing, is Professor Ed Hawkins, who's a climate scientist at the University of Reading. Hello, Ed.
Hi, Adam. How are you?
Good, thanks. I can see you on a screen through the glass, but I can only see you from kind of chest up. So you could be wearing Bermuda shorts or swimming trunks.
I am in shorts, yes,
okay.
At home, yes.
Now, Ed, just before we start our discussion, explain to newscasters why every couple of days I drink my morning coffee in my house out of one of your mugs.
So yes, I created a graphic called the climate stripes, which is a very simple representation of changes in temperature over time, just using simple coloured stripes going from dark blues back in 150 years ago to bright reds today.
And just to link what's happening this summer with my mug, your design, are you going to have to do a new version of the mug that's got even darker red stripes for this year, last year, next year?
We've already had to change the colours over the last couple of years because they've been so hot to add extra colours to represent the extreme temperatures over the last couple of years.
Justin, we'll do the numbers in a bit, but just give me a flavour of how you've been experiencing the heat wave.
So I started on Sunday morning on Primrose Hill in London, seeing this heat wave stretch ahead of us, and I have been rushing through the heat ever since. Yesterday was a particular adventure as we tried to get to the hottest place in Britain, phoning BBC Weather, getting sent to Herne in just outside Bournemouth, and then we were going to go to somewhere called Wigan Ford, which I think is in East Sussex. So we sort of battling,
and you ended up in Gosport,
and we ended up finally in Gosport. Finally got to overlook Gosport. We've got to be clear. We couldn't actually make it to Gosport. We got down and could see Gosport in our camera, so we consider that a triumph.
And that's on the south coast.
That's on the south coast in Hampshire, just outside Portsmouth, and it's actually quite an unusual place, I think. Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, to have a really high, record tune temperature because it's right by the sea. So you would have thought it would be moderated by the sea breezes.
Yeah, we often tend to find the records further inland, and I think Yeovilton's actually just beaten the Gosport record as we speak.
36.4, I think it is, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, and we're recording at 3:45 on Thursday afternoon, and that record was set about an hour ago. So, Justin, how are you explaining to people on I should call it the 9:30 news, because the 10 o'clock news was on at 9:30 last night because of the football, the difference between hot weather and a hotter climate?
It was really interesting. I was on a phone-in program, Nicky Campbell's phone-in yesterday morning, and it was quite interesting. There were loads of people writing in saying, why are you making such a fuss about this? We've always had hot days. We've always had heat waves. What's the difference? And of course, they're right. We have always had hot days. We've always had heat waves. But there is a big difference. Those heat waves are happening in a different world. So the kind of high-pressure systems that give us clear air, give us lots of sunshine, light winds that allow the heat to really build up, are now happening against a background of a significantly warmer world, up 1.4 degrees Celsius on pre-industrial levels. And that means the heat waves, when they come, tend to be hotter, they tend to last for longer, and they're more frequent. So yes, of course it is weather, but it's weather, as I said last night on the news, it is weather in a warming world.
And Ed, you've been looking at one of the periods of time that lots of people bring up when it's hot, which is the heat wave of 1976. And I remember, my grandparents telling stories about the roads melting. You could fry an egg on the boot of the car, and that's actually not actually
I think
possible.
Your parents would probably remember it as well, wouldn't they?
Yeah, but I feel it's more that a story that my grandparents told me, which maybe tells you about the loquaciousness of the different generations of my family. But anyway, Ed, do that thing that lots of people have been doing this week, which is comparing the hot weather now with the very, very hot weather we had in 1976.
Yeah, so 1976 was certainly an extraordinary heat wave for its time. We had 15 consecutive days where somewhere reached 32 degrees, and that's an unprecedented length for a heat wave. It came at the end of a year-long drought, and I think that's what made it so memorable, was that many people were queuing at standpipes for water in different places around the country. There were lots of wildfires, some of the schools were shut, and so on. So yes, it was an extraordinary heatwave for its time. But obviously, as Justin says, the world has warmed over the past 50 years by about 1 degree since 1976. But the important point to note is that that does not mean that our heat waves have got just 1 degree hotter. For southern England, what we've seen actually over the last 50 years is those heat waves have got 3 or 4 degrees hotter. So the extremes are getting hotter much faster than you might expect if you're just talking about global averages. So that means that those 15 days above 32 in 1976 would be 15 days above 35 today. And that makes a big difference. It probably doubles the mortality that we would expect to see from such an event.
And also, Justin, this incredibly hot weather has coincided with London Climate Week, when lots of people come to London to talk about climate change and the science and what the political solutions and responses to that are, which is a kind of amazing coincidence. Where is the conversation about climate change with the kind of business, political, scientific elite?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the political elite obviously is much more divided than it was even like 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, it's hard to remember, isn't it? There used to be a kind of consensus, not just among the political parties here in Britain, but among leaders around the world, that this was a really serious issue that the world needed to come together and tackle. And we've seen that really melt away, haven't we? And then, ironically, you see these kind of super hot heat wave coming. And remember, really early in the year for us to have a heat wave like this, June instead of late July, August, which you typically expect. So I think, that's really striking. It was quite interesting. I mean, look, obviously Climate Week is climate focused, so you don't get the kind of businesses that aren't engaged in tackling climate change. But really interesting to see some big players out there. The Octopus event was absolutely huge.
The energy company.
The energy company, electricity company, got 3,000 or 4,000 people together, had this sort of big roster of speakers, obviously kind of literally putting its tent on the ground, saying, we want to be part of the climate discussion. And it is an interesting company in that here you've got a big new company, multi-billion-pound company employing, I think 8,000 people here in the UK, supplying energy to 7 million households, which has kind of forged a new path in energy over just a few years. And that, often it's this kind of behavior you expect more from a tech firm. And I think, we should perhaps feel optimistic to see these kind of developments, these kind of exciting new businesses developing in the clean energy space.
And Justin, as part of the conversations around Climate Change Week, the Climate Change Committee, who kind of mark the government's homework on cutting emissions, published their latest big progress reports. I've kind of skimmed the summary. I haven't read all the annexes, as maybe I would have done in the olden days when it was more part of the daily political conversation. But what's their assessment this week?
Top line is emissions continue to fall, down 1.8%. 2025 on 2024. Really interesting picture. They're saying on the one hand, electric vehicles, which remember the government is talking about weakening the zero emissions mandate, which is a requirement that car manufacturers sell a certain proportion of cars and get fined really quite heavily if they don't sell as many low emission vehicles as they should. They're talking about watering it down. At the same time, the Climate Change Committee is saying actually sales are doing really well. 1 in 4 cars are now fully electric cars sold in the UK compared to 1 in 5. That's a significant change, 20% to 25%. Big change, going in the right direction. They say we can see a pathway now to a kind of fully electric car fleet in the UK. Obviously, that will take many decades to happen. On the other hand, heat pumps are really quite disappointing. The rate of growth of heat pumps has fallen massively. 7% last year compared to sort of 56% the year before. They're saying that's to do with a grant. But when pressed, they say, look, there are some underlying issues about the cost and the returns. Because when you push them on this, even the Climate Change Committee admits that actually it's very hard to save money with a heat pump without a flexible tariff, without solar panels, without batteries, without all the other stuff. And that, of course, Adam, is expensive.
And the whole time I've even known about the existence of the Climate Change Committee, they've basically been saying the same big thing, which is that electricity is going to have to become cheaper as we all transition to using electricity for everything rather than, say, using gas for your heating in the winter, which does not seem like a comfortable subject to discuss right now. And actually, you realise there's some pointers there for Andy Burnham taking over as Prime Minister. If he really is serious about cutting people's energy bills, then actually making electricity cheaper by putting fewer government policies on your electricity bill would be a very quick, fast way of of changing the price.
And
of
Adam,
electricity.
also a very expensive thing to do, and that is the big challenge.
Because it then goes onto your tax bill as opposed to your energy bill. Right, Ed, a few science things about what we're living through right at the moment. What is the role of humidity in how this heat wave feels for us all individually?
Yes, Adam, that's right. So this heat wave is a bit different to some of the others we've experienced in recent years, in that it is much more humid this time around. And a more humid heat wave is more dangerous because it feels hotter. We've got this feels-like temperature, which is often quoted. And the reason for this is that when it's more humid, the body finds it harder to give off heat through sweating because it's more humid air around you. Yes, and so it feels a lot hotter and is therefore more dangerous.
And is that when we hear people talk about the wet bulb effect, that's what that is?
Exactly right, yes.
Just giving people things to say in the pub when they're out in the beer garden. They can talk about the wet bulb effect, makes you sound like an expert. And then another thing, Ed.
Sounds like a fun evening.
Yeah. And then, Ed, this other thing that people have been talking about is just the fact that it's not getting much less hotter at night. So there's no respite.
Yeah, we've seen the records broken for warmest night across the country as well. And yes, that makes it really hard to sleep. I know I struggled to sleep last night when the temperature doesn't drop below 20 degrees. We call it a tropical night. And we're seeing more and more of those happen, and we'll continue to see more of those in the future as well.
I just wanted to say, I'm in Cardiff, so my team is based in Cardiff. Cardiff, 28 degrees last night. 28 degrees in Cardiff overnight. Tonight, I think we looked at 3 and 4 a.m. It's about 25 degrees and 25 degrees in Cardiff. I mean, this is a really hot and unusual heat wave.
But here's an interesting thing about language. When you say a tropical night, your brain straight away thinks of holidays and of something pleasant. And you realize, no, a tropical night in the UK with our houses built the way they are, with no air conditioning and not enough ventilation and great insulation for keeping the heat in winter, a tropical night is not a great thing to live through. And that's why I'm intrigued about the red heat health alerts from the Met Office and the UK Health Security Agency, Justin, trying to sort of not jolt people or scare them, but change the language from heat wave, siesta to, no, this is something you need to worry about because of your health and the health of vulnerable people in your family.
But I think you've hit on something really interesting, which I think this heat wave, people really have experienced negatively. And if you go out, there aren't people out and about.
So quiet.
Even on Sunday, when the heat was just beginning to build, we noticed there were a few people sunbathing, but not very many. Most people who were out were sitting under trees. It's like now in the UK, in heat waves, it's got so hot, it frankly is unpleasant.
And yeah, I just saw that the London Ambulance Service said that on Wednesday they responded to the highest number of life-threatening emergencies in their history, and that is because of the heat. Ed, we had a big chat with Emma Pinchbeck from the Climate Change Committee on Newscast a few weeks ago about adaptation, about what are the things you do to the fabric of the nation that make these very hot heat episodes more bearable. Are you seeing examples of adaptation actually happening and actually places where people will be feeling more comfortable in this heat wave than they would have done otherwise?
I think those who've got air conditioning will be feeling rather smug at the moment that they can enjoy the cooler temperatures. But no, I think adaptation is a key issue for us to learn how to deal with heat. I think that's particularly true for people's workplaces, which are not designed necessarily for the hot temperatures, and they can't be as productive when it's so hot. I think it's an issue for our hospitals. Trying to recover from surgery on a hot hospital ward is not going to be much fun. And for our schools as well. We've already seen, lots of schools shut at the moment. And, imagine trying to take exams in a hot, stifling exam hall, trying to think about your future. It's not a good place to be.
Justin, have you seen examples of good adaptation?
I have. I wanted to have something optimistic. On Monday, we went to a cool space set up in a housing estate in Tottenham Hale, kind of, working class community in London. And it was absolutely lovely. Everybody in the community who was involved had gone out for a little walk and then come in, and they were sitting around chatting, and they were saying what a wonderfully cool space it was. It's called the Engine Room in Tottenham Hale. So if you're warm and you're in Tottenham, there is a place for you to go. And the nice thing
How they made it cool? What was...
It was an air-conditioned space. Right. It was a community centre that air-conditioned. And the idea was you go in, you have a cup of coffee, cup of tea. They had art stuff there. And it was kind of... What was lovely, it was like a focus for the community. And the people who'd come in were really enjoying being with each other. And obviously they felt a sense of relief coming in. One of them said, chilling for the mind, chilling for the body. And it was a really chilled space. It was lovely.
Ed, I can't remember if it was you that taught me this trick, but putting a bottle of frozen tap water in front of your fan in the bedroom at at night is a really good way of dialing down the heat in your bedroom. Except since you've given me that advice, I've moved house and I do not have any fans anymore. So that's not what I've been doing this week. But
Why didn't you take your fans with you?
I don't know. Well, because I was probably in denial about our warming world, even though I spent many years covering the story. Right, Ed, anything else you want to tell us about what we're living through this period?
Well, it's very clear that things are hotter now than they were, and that's primarily because our greenhouse gas emissions, primarily from burning fossil fuels, are making every summer and every heat wave hotter than they would have been in a world without those emissions. And so, yes, we need to adapt to what's going on now and to deal with the heat better. But for the future, the heat waves are just going to get hotter and hotter and hotter until we manage to reach global net zero greenhouse gas emissions and stabilize the climate.
I would just underscore what Ed said. This isn't a natural disaster. This is a man-made disaster, and we are continuing to make it worse.
Lots to think about. Justin, thank you very much.
Oh,
He does this every time.
Oh,
right. Justin, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And Professor Ed Hawkins, thanks to you too.
Thank you very much.
Now, on Thursday afternoon, the National Executive Committee, which runs the Labour Party, set out the timetable for their leadership contest for finding a new Prime Minister. Although we know that there probably isn't going to be a contest, but there might be. Anyway, so here are the dates and the dates that matter. So we already knew that the nominations will open on Thursday, the 9th of July. And this is MPs nominating somebody. And that window will close on the 15th of July at 6 p.m. Then that is when the window opens for affiliates to the Labour Party, so trade unions and other organisations. Their window for nominations will close on Thursday, the 16th of July at 6 p.m, so a day later. And then, if there is only one candidate nominated, Andy Burnham, he will then be crowned, to carry on the coronation metaphor, at a special conference on Friday, the 17th of July. So if no one else gets 81 plus nominations to challenge him, the new Prime Minister will be officially endorsed on Friday, the 17th of July, and presumably will walk up Downing Street pretty soon after that special conference. However, if there is a challenger, the next phase will be the constituency Labour parties nominating their person, and then there'll be a ballot of members and supporters starting on Thursday, the 6th of August, closing on Thursday, the 27th of August, with a result announced at a special conference on Saturday, the 29th of August. So in the now quite unlikely looking event of there being a challenger to Andy Burnham, the winner will be announced on Saturday, the 29th of August. And one other little thing that we weren't totally sure of has now been confirmed. On Monday, the 13th of July, there will be a hustings in front of Labour MPs for all of the prospective candidates. So that's prospective candidates. So you wouldn't have had to get all your nominations by then. So maybe, I don't know, somebody like Al Carnes, the former defence minister, might say, I want to be in the hustings up against Andy Burnham to test him. And then Al Carnes wouldn't have had to get 81 nominations to earn his place in the hustings. So actually that could turn out to be a slightly more interesting event than circumstances might suggest. Now, that's the timetable for Andy Burnham or someone else becoming Prime Minister. Let's talk about reactions to Andy Burnham becoming Prime Minister. We had a really interesting conversation with Helen McNamara yesterday, the former Deputy Cabinet Secretary. Today, we're going to have an interesting conversation with Simon Jack, the BBC's business editor, because he's been at the conference of the British Chambers of Commerce, testing the temperature, if you pardon the pun, about the new Prime Minister amongst business leaders. And here's my conversation with Simon Jack, which we had at about 3 p.m. after he'd hot-footed it. Oh, I've done it again from that conference. And Simon is here. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Adam.
Before we give a sense of what was happening with the business community, how was the business community coping with the heat in this conference centre?
I have to say that the air conditioning in there, I'm not sure it was completely packed up, but it was certainly under par for the beating sun that was just in Parliament Square today.
And does it make any business leader think, oh yeah, I really need to double down on climate action because this conference is happening during a heat wave? This proves the climate scientists might have a point. Or is it not really a subject?
Well, weirdly, it did come up, but not in those exact terms. And in fact, quite the opposite was true. Because the Chancellor, on what might be her swan song in front of a business community, probably will be, was sort of pressed on the government's approach to oil and gas exploration, which, as you know, has been a contentious issue. You've got the unions want to, do more oil and gas exploration. You've got
for the jobs,
for the jobs, for the revenue, for the tax, etc. And you've got, parts of the government who are sympathetic to that. And on the other hand, you've got Ed Miliband, who is staunchly resisting those calls. And there's clearly a bit of a war of words. And actually, I would say ideas coming to a bit of fruition there. She was asked about it, and there's two big projects which are coming up for approval. One is called Rosebank, one's called Jackdaw. They're big fields, and they've been held up through the courts, and she said that she hoped that they would go through. Now, that is not the same thing as ripping up manifesto commitments on new oil and gas drilling, but clearly there is a direction of travel which, and also if you factor in the Aberdeenshire Conservative victory when they
in the by-election,
by-election where they basically ran partly on a ticket of saying that we will, say, green light new oil and gas. Then I think a lot of people are thinking about, yes, we all want renewables. Do we have to do that? And basically, if can we ride both horses rather than shoot one of them? And shooting one of them being oil and gas. So it did come up.
And of course, the reason that Rosebank and Jackdaw are not necessarily scientific examples of net zero being ripped up is because they were projects that were basically approved already under the previous government, stopped by the courts, and this government's having to decide whether to approve them again.
Yeah, and all I can tell you is that the people I know who are associated with these projects are supremely confident that they will find a way to approve them. Where we go from there in terms of new oil and gas licenses, I think still up for grabs.
It was interesting hearing what Rachel Reeves was saying, because she was talking as if she still had months and maybe even years in the job.
It was funny, wasn't it? Because she went out there to defend her record. 2 years ago, she was in front of that audience as a wannabe chancellor, shadow chancellor, promising to be pro-business, pro-growth, whatever. Today, she was possibly her last address to that audience as chancellor, defending her record and also saying that, I think I've got more to do. And that my advice to the next chancellor would keep doing what I'm doing. So was that a subtle pitch, or not so subtle pitch, to keep her job? And saying that stability was important. Stability in her mind, I think, meaning keep the same chancellor.
Yeah.
But I think that there was, I don't think she misunderstands that, the way the wind is blowing, and that she's very likely to be replaced as chancellor.
And did it feel like there was a chancellor recruitment process going on at this conference, and the lots of the business people there were on the imaginary recruitment panel?
Well, it was very interesting because I asked the question, obviously, because it's a very key one for business, who's going to be the next chancellor. And what I can tell you is there is no consensus candidate. I had a couple of streeting votes. I saw a couple of Miliband quotes, a couple of people very anti-Miliband. I had a couple of people saying, I don't care who it is, it's what they do rather than the person in the job that matters. And what they want is, after a couple of bruising years where they thought a government that had a charm offensive to business, saying we are pro-growth, pro-business, feel that they were slightly misled, and that, big increases in employment taxes, national living wage, a raft of new employment rights, et cetera, have been actually quite anti-business. So they're saying that, we felt that we were kind of sold a bit of a pup first time round. That can't happen again.
And are the business leaders feeling that Andy Burnham is pro-business, or that he might carry on in that less pro-business vein that you just mentioned there?
Well, it's interesting. I think that there was a kind of, will the real Andy Burnham please stand up, to quote Eminem.
He's already gone back home to Manchester after 2 days. 3 days.
Well, it's sort of, he's got one very powerful card which to play with that community, which is that economic growth in Manchester has been faster than the UK as a whole. So the question is, can you take that secret sauce of, for example, combined authorities, more joined up planning, all that kind of stuff, and replicate it at a national scale? And so there was quite a lot of interest in whether greater devolution is going to be, can unlock greater growth. So there's a lot of interest and, I would say, enthusiasm for that idea. But there was some caution in the sense that if you're going to allow local authorities to raise additional taxes, revenue raising, split up income taxes, all that kind of stuff, then there's a bit more nervousness about that. How would that actually work? So I think a lot of people are feeling their way, as to what a Burnham prime ministership might look like.
And that conversation reminds me of the conversation we had yesterday with Helen McNamara, former Deputy Cabinet Secretary, and she was saying that her reading of what Andy Burnham has said in the last few days is that he's going to do a big thing about devolution, fiscal devolution, so allowing areas to change their tax regimes to benefit certain industries so that you can create these big clusters. But she was also talking about how Andy Burnham is inheriting quite a lot of work that's already underway. And actually, Rachel Reeves announced some of that early thinking about devolution of tax revenues in the budget the last time. So there's some blueprints being worked on already.
And we should say that Andy Burnham, in the minds of many, is standing on the shoulders of giants in predecessors who were city officials, Richard Lees, Howard Bernstein, etc., who kind of laid the groundwork for a kind of stability. So if you've got 10
local, they were running Manchester
because they were running Manchester before, and if you've got local authorities where you got one side on one side of the road it's this authority, on this side of the road it's the other. So who gets to dig up the road and who has to tell all that kind of stuff. And that does matter when it tries to. So Andy Burnham's got a reputation within the business community as someone who appears to be able to get things done. And that I heard that phrase a lot today.
Although so much of Manchesterism, as it's come to be known, that you witness when you're in Manchester seems to be based on investment from abroad. For example, there is a whole tram terminus called the Etihad campus because it's the Etihad Stadium and lots of other buildings that were built by and sponsored by Etihad because they're based on investment from the Gulf. I mean, that's something the government under Keir Starmer was doing in a big way anyway, wasn't it? Yeah. Taking the tin round places like the Gulf.
And with quite a lot of success in the early years. I mean, that's the interesting thing, because one of the biggest trump cards that the government played over the last couple of years was saying to international investors, what you've had 5 prime ministers, blah, 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 7 business secretaries, whatever the numbers are, we can offer you a bit of stability. And so you're going to be dealing with us from now on. Now, obviously, clearly, in the current circumstances, that card is harder to play when we've got a new look government on the way. So, but so there's a question about foreign direct investment. Sort of like the Etihads, of course, have a big relationship with Manchester City, of course. So, that Manchester City, the football team, so that obviously helps. But they also had on stage today Andy Haldane. Now, he used to be the chief economist of the Bank of England. He's currently the president of British Chambers of Commerce. And importantly, he very much has the ear of Andy Burnham. He's one of his key advisors, along with Jim O'Neill, Lord O'Neill, who used to be former economist for Goldman Sachs. And what was interesting about Andy Haldane is he said, we need more British capital going into British business. And he gave a very clear idea of how that would work, saying that at the moment we've got $9 trillion worth of sort of personal wealth in the UK. And he likened that to a reservoir next to what he likened to a farm, which is the UK economy. And he said at the moment, this reservoir isn't irrigating the farm, which is right next door. So you need to get pension savings and put it into the UK economy. And then you think, well, how do you do that? Do you force them to do it? What you do was the clear message is at the moment when you put money into your pension, you get tax breaks on it. And so you're getting £60 billion worth of tax breaks across the UK, most of which money is being invested in the stock markets abroad. Less than 5% of pension savings goes into UK shares. That is spectacularly low compared to our competitors, like, for example, Australia. It's about 40%. In the US, it's 60%, what have you. And so we're giving a massive tax break for savers to put money into Nvidia and Amazon. And he clearly was trying to say that's
not
going to
another
work.
example of where Andy Burnham and whoever his chancellor is might end up being Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves plus, because Rachel Reeves was already doing lots of things to try and encourage people's savings to go into UK stocks. For example, reducing the amount you can put in a cash ISA.
Correct.
To encourage you to put it in a stocks and shares ISA.
Yeah, and he referenced that. He said there are 2 major issues. There's one called the Mansion House Accord, which was getting a bunch of insurance and pension companies to sort of voluntarily, but not really voluntarily, put 5% of all their assets into UK assets. And there's also the cash ISA, which you say, basically reduce the amount of cash you can hold because it's not a very productive asset. I think this was a much more powerful lever that Andy Haldane was talking about, which is that you're not going to get a tax break for investing in foreign companies. You're only going to get a tax break if you invest in UK companies. And that to me, with a little bit of financial nous, seems to me quite a powerful lever.
Right. Interesting. So it's now making me think that have Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves been like diet Andy Burnham, and what we're now going to get is
full fat,
or Andy Burnham zero, depending on your tastes. So yeah, intriguing.
Yeah.
Anything else you picked up from the Very Hot Conference Centre that we haven't discussed?
Basically, there's a latent level of optimism in the sense that, inflation is coming down. And when Rachel Reeves defended her record, she said, listen, her defence was that, when I came in, public finances were a little out of control, lots of unfunded spending promises. We basically had to put business up on taxes. We took it easy on you in the last budget, but we've got public finances, inflation on a firmer footing. And I think there was a general acceptance that was probably right. But what they want is they just want to be left alone in a way to get on with it. And this is very interesting. So this is where Burnhamism or Manchesterism comes in, because Andy Burnham is not a get out of the way and let business do what they want to do. It's a much more muscular interventionist role that he imagines for the state. And he says it worked in Manchester, it can work elsewhere. Not everyone is convinced by that.
Although sometimes that muscular role involves saying to housing developers, actually, you can build less affordable homes than you might have to do in other places to get this development built.
Yeah, well,
so it can be muscular in the sort of pulling back rather than pushing forward.
Yeah, well, anyway, the thing I heard more than often, I've mentioned this already, is that he looks like someone who can get things done. And that was if that's true, then, we're all ears.
Fascinating. Simon, thank you very much.
Pleasure, Adam.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. We're available every single day as a podcast, sometimes where we include bonus material that we've recorded, and that can be downloaded every single day of the week from BBC Sounds. And we'll be back with another Newscast very soon. Bye-bye.